The desert wind carried the scent of sage and dust across the endless expanse of the American frontier, painting the evening sky in shades of crimson and gold. The sun, a dying ember on the horizon, cast long shadows across the grasslands of the Double Bar Ranch, where cattle lowed in the distance and the day's work was drawing to its weary close. Clara Whitman stood at the doorway of the ranch kitchen, her flour-dusted apron bearing witness to another 16-hour day. The heat from the massive iron stove still radiated against her back, even as the evening breeze promised a cool night ahead. At 28, she was young to be a widow, but the West had a way of aging folks beyond their years. Her husband Tom had been dead these past 2 winters, killed in a saloon brawl over a card game gone wrong, leaving her with debts and a reputation as damaged goods among the cowboys who passed through. She watched the dust cloud approaching from the south, knowing it meant another cattle drive stopping for provisions. Her jaw tightened involuntarily. More men meant more leering glances, more whispered comments when they thought she couldn't hear, more assumptions about what a young widow might offer besides beef stew and cornbread. The lead rider emerged from the dust first, sitting tall in his saddle with the easy grace of a man born to the nomadic life. Caleb Morgan had been riding since before he could properly walk, and it showed in every line of his sun-weathered frame. At 32, he'd seen more of the frontier than most men twice his age, from the silver mines of Nevada to the cattle ranches of Texas, always moving, never settling. He dismounted near the water trough, his spurs jingling a lonesome tune against the packed earth. When he removed his hat to wipe the sweat from his brow, Clara caught sight of eyes the color of storm clouds, gray and unpredictable. Their gazes met across the dusty yard, and something passed between them. Not the usual crude assessment she'd grown accustomed to, but something deeper, more dangerous. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough from trail dust, "my outfit's looking to buy provisions. Trail boss said you're the one to see." Clara nodded curtly, turning back to the kitchen. "Supper's at sundown. 50 cents a head, provisions extra, no credit." The other cowboys began filing in, their rowdy voices filling the air with tales of stampedes and river crossings. Clara busied herself with the evening meal, ladling beans and slicing bread with practiced efficiency. She'd learned to make herself invisible during these times, to become nothing more than hands that served and cleaned. But throughout the meal, she felt those gray eyes following her movements, not with the hungry look she knew too well, but with a quiet curiosity that unsettled her more than any crude proposition ever had. As night fell and the cowboys gathered around the campfire outside, Clara found herself drawn to the window. Caleb sat apart from the others, rolling a cigarette with deliberate care. The firelight danced across his features, highlighting the scar that ran along his left jaw, a souvenir from some past violence. "No doubt. You ought not to stare at the help, Morgan," drawled Jake Henley, the trail boss. "That there's Tom Whitman's widow. Fine cook, but she ain't the friendly type, if you catch my meaning." "Didn't ask," Caleb replied, his voice carrying a warning that Jake was wise enough to heed. Clara turned away from the window, her cheeks burning. She shouldn't care what some drifting cowboy thought or didn't think. Come morning, he'd be gone like all the rest, leaving nothing behind but dust and emptiness. But when she stepped outside to dump the wash water, she found him standing by the kitchen door, silhouetted against the star-filled sky. "I wanted to thank you for the meal," he said simply. "Best food we've had in weeks. It's my job," Clara replied, her voice steadier than her racing heart. "Still," he paused, seeming to weigh his words. "I knew Tom Whitman. Played cards with him once in Amarillo. I'm sorry for your loss." The unexpected kindness caught her off guard. "He's been gone 2 years now. Doesn't make it easier." They stood in silence, the night sounds of the ranch crickets, distant coyotes, the restless shifting of horses filling the space between them. The full moon cast everything in silver light, making the familiar landscape seem foreign, full of possibility. "You heading south with the herd?" Clara asked, surprising herself with the question. "Mexico, eventually. Got a job waiting at a ranch outside Sonora. Long way to travel. I've traveled longer for less." His eyes found hers in the moonlight. "Though sometimes a man finds reason to change his plans." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Clara felt something shift inside her, a door long barred beginning to creak open. She thought of the empty bed waiting in her small room, of the endless days stretching ahead, each one exactly like the last. "There's coffee," she heard herself say, "if you've a mind for it." He followed her into the kitchen, where the dying embers in the stove cast a warm glow. She poured 2 cups from the pot that always sat ready, her hands trembling slightly. When he took the cup from her, their fingers brushed, and the contact sent a shock through her entire body. They talked quietly as the night deepened, of places seen and unseen, of dreams deferred and paths not taken. He told her of the desert blooms that appeared after rare rains, brilliant splashes of color in the wasteland. She spoke of the home she'd left in Ohio, of the books she'd once loved to read before the frontier stripped away such luxuries. "Why stay?" he asked eventually. "Why not go back east?" "Nothing there for me now. Besides, the ranch owns my debt. Tom left more bills than assets." The unfairness of it sparked something in his eyes. "That's no way for a woman to live. It's the way it is." Outside, the campfire had died to embers. The other cowboys had rolled into their bedrolls, leaving only the night watch making his rounds. Inside the small kitchen, the world had shrunk to just 2 people and the space between them. When Caleb stood to leave, Clara felt panic rise in her throat. Tomorrow he would ride south, and she would return to her stove and her silence. The thought was unbearable. "Stay," she whispered, the word escaping before courage could fail her. He turned back, his face unreadable in the shadows. "Clara, just tonight, just—" She couldn't finish, couldn't name what she was asking for. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, his hands gentle as they framed her face. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was desperate, hungry, 2 years of loneliness pouring out in a single moment. He responded with equal fervor, pulling her against him as if he could somehow merge their souls through sheer will. Later, the ranch hands would whisper about that night. The ranch cook gave him one wild night, they'd say with knowing looks and crude laughter. But they understood nothing of what truly passed between Clara and Caleb in those precious hours, the tenderness beyond the passion, the connection that transcended the physical, the promise neither dared speak aloud. As dawn approached, they lay entwined in her narrow bed, both knowing the moment of parting was near. "I'll come back," he said against her hair. "Don't make promises you can't keep." "I don't." She wanted to believe him, wanted to hold on to this feeling forever. But the West had taught her that wanting and having were 2 very different things. So when he dressed in the pre-dawn darkness and pressed one last kiss to her forehead, she kept her eyes closed, memorizing the feel of his lips, the scent of leather and tobacco that clung to him. The door closed softly behind him, and Clara was alone again. But something had changed in those wild hours. A spark had been lit in the darkness, and not all the prairie wind in the world could extinguish it now. The morning sun crept across the kitchen floor as Clara mechanically went through her routine, stoking the fire, mixing biscuit dough, setting coffee to boil. Her body moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind was elsewhere, following a lone rider heading south through the grasslands. On the table lay Caleb's neckerchief, forgotten in their haste. She picked it up, inhaling the lingering scent of smoke and trail dust, then quickly tucked it into her apron pocket before anyone could see. "Coffee ready yet?" Buck Lawson's gruff voice made her jump. The ranch foreman stood in the doorway, his weathered face creased with suspicion. That drifter in his outfit lit out early, real early. "Coffee's on the stove," Clara replied, keeping her voice neutral. Buck helped himself, his eyes never leaving her face. "Funny thing, that Morgan fellow asking after you last night. Some of the boys said they saw him heading this way after the fire died down." Clara's hand stilled on the dough. "If you have something to say, Buck, say it plain. Just looking out for the ranch's reputation is all. Widow woman needs to be careful about the company she keeps." The implication hung heavy in the air. Clara turned to face him, flour-dusted hands planted firmly on her hips. "I've worked this kitchen for 3 years. Buck Lawson, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you have complaint about my work, take it to Mr. Daniels. Otherwise, I'll thank you to mind your own business." Buck's face darkened. But before he could respond, the breakfast bell rang. Within minutes, the kitchen filled with hungry cowboys, and Clara lost herself in the familiar chaos of serving meals. But throughout the day, she felt their eyes on her, heard the whispered conversations that stopped whenever she drew near. By evening, the rumors had taken on a life of their own. She'd become exactly what she'd fought so hard against, another easy widow in their eyes, no better than the painted ladies in town. The days that followed brought unexpected changes in her body. Mornings found her retching behind the kitchen, struggling to keep down even water. Food smells that once comforted now turned her stomach. Exhaustion weighted her limbs like lead, making the long days even harder to bear. Clara knew the signs. She'd watched her mother and sisters enough times to recognize what was happening. The timing left no doubt that one wild night had left more than memories behind. Fear and wonder warred in her chest. A baby meant complications she couldn't afford, questions she couldn't answer, shame she couldn't bear. But it also meant she wasn't alone anymore, that something of that magical night would remain with her always. The autumn rains came early that year, turning the ranch yard into a muddy morass. Clara struggled through her duties, hiding her condition beneath loose aprons and careful movements. But Margaret Hayes, the ranch owner's wife who occasionally visited, had sharp eyes. "You're looking peaked, Clara," she observed one afternoon, watching as Clara gripped the table through a wave of dizziness. "Perhaps you should see Doc Morrison in town." "I'm fine, ma'am, just tired is all." Margaret's knowing look said she wasn't fooled, but she didn't press. "You know, my sister in Denver is looking for help. Good position, respectable household, if you ever wanted a change." The offer was kindness wrapped in propriety, a way out that would save everyone's reputation. Clara murmured her thanks, filing it away with all the other escape routes she couldn't take. That night, alone in her room, she penned a letter to her sister Catherine back in Ohio. "Dearest Catherine, the western weather has turned harsh early this year. I find myself thinking often of home, of Mother's garden and the old elm tree. Life here continues much as always. Though there are changes coming I scarce know how to meet. I think sometimes of returning, but wonder if the girl who left still exists, or if the frontier has remade her entirely. How I wish we could sit together over tea as we once did. I have so much to tell you that cannot be put to paper." She sealed the letter, knowing she might never send it. What could she tell her proper Eastern sister? That she'd taken a drifter to her bed, that she carried his child, that despite everything, she didn't regret that night. The next week brought worse troubles. Word spread that the Colton gang had been seen in the territory, preying on isolated ranches and travelers. Mr. Daniels ordered extra watches and told the women to stay close to the main buildings. Clara was checking supplies in the storage shed when she heard horses approaching. Her blood froze as 3 riders appeared. Not ranch hands, but strangers with hard faces and harder eyes. Well, the leader drawled, dismounting with deliberate menace. "Looks like we found ourselves some hospitality." Clara backed toward the door, but another rider had circled behind, cutting off her escape. "Kitchen's closed," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Now that's unfriendly." The leader, a man with cold blue eyes and a pock-marked face, advanced slowly. "We've ridden a long way, and we're powerful hungry. Surely you can spare some grub for weary travelers." Clara's mind raced. The ranch hands were out with the herd, miles away. Only old Pete, the half-deaf stable hand, remained nearby. I'll fix you something," Just let me get to the kitchen. You do that, pretty lady. We'll just help ourselves to whatever else we might need." For the next hour, Clara worked under their watchful eyes, serving beans and cornbread while they ransacked the supply shed. Her hands shook as she poured coffee, especially when the leader's gaze lingered on her figure. "Widow woman, ain't you?" he asked, noting her black armband. "Must get lonely out here." Clara didn't answer, concentrating on slicing bread. The knife in her hand offered some comfort, though she knew it would be little use against 3 armed men. When they finally left, loaded with stolen supplies and threats to return, Clara collapsed against the wall, her whole body trembling. That night, she wedged a chair against her door and kept Tom's old pistol within reach, though she'd never fired it. The encounter with the outlaws made her situation feel even more precarious. The ranch was becoming dangerous, but where could she go? Her savings wouldn't get her far, and her condition would soon be obvious to all. During a supply run to town, she overheard news that made her heart skip. A cowboy matching Caleb's description had been seen heading back north, asking about work at various ranches. But hope turned to ash when the storyteller added, "Heard he got himself killed down in Mexico, bar fight over some señorita." Clara gripped the counter for support, the world spinning around her. Dead. The word echoed in her mind, final and unforgiving. That night, she sobbed into Caleb's neckerchief until no tears remained. But as days passed, the story didn't sit right. Details changed with each telling shot in Sonora, knifed in Chihuahua, hanged for horse theft. The West was full of such tales, growing wilder with each repetition. Clara chose to believe what her heart whispered in the darkness, that somewhere. Caleb Morgan still drew breath. The autumn winds grew colder, rattling the kitchen windows and sending tumbleweeds racing across the yard. Clara stood washing dishes one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. Her hand drifted to her still flat belly, where new life grew despite all hardship. "If you're out there," she whispered to the wind. "If you're still alive, find me, find us." The wind offered no answer, only the lonesome howl of coyotes in the distance. But Clara had learned to find strength in silence, hope in heartache. Whatever came next, she would face it as she'd faced everything else, with stubborn determination and the memory of one wild night when love had broken through all barriers. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new whispers, new threats. But tonight, she allowed herself to remember strong arms and gray eyes, promises made in the darkness, and the possibility that somewhere beyond the horizon, a lone rider might be making his way home. The Mojave stretched before Caleb like an ocean of sand and stone, its vastness both beautiful and merciless. He'd been riding south for 3 weeks since leaving the Double Bar Ranch, but each mile felt like a betrayal. The memory of Clara's touch, her whispered words in the darkness, haunted him worse than any ghost. The desert had its own language, the rattle of sidewinders, the screech of hawks circling overhead, the whisper of wind through ancient Joshua trees. By day, the sun beat down like a blacksmith's hammer, turning the sand into a shimmering furnace. By night, the temperature plummeted until his breath came in visible puffs, and he huddled close to his small fire. Feeding it carefully hoarded mesquite and sage. His horse, a sturdy bay named Dusty, picked its way carefully through the rocky terrain. Water was scarce here, each spring or seep more precious than gold. Caleb rationed his supply carefully, knowing that one miscalculation could mean death in this unforgiving land. On the 4th day in the deep desert, he came upon a sight that stopped him cold. Wagon tracks, maybe 2 days old, veering off the main trail into a box canyon. His instincts, honed by years of survival, screamed danger, but conscience won out. Folks who left the trail in this country were either lost or in trouble. He found them near sunset, a family of migrants, their wagon axles snapped, their water barrels empty. The father, a thin man named Samuel Morrison, was trying to dig for water with bloodied hands, while his wife comforted 3 children in the shade of the broken wagon. "Thank the Lord," Samuel gasped when he saw Caleb. "We've been here 2 days. The baby." Caleb dismounted immediately, sharing his water despite knowing it would leave him short. The youngest child, barely 2 years old, was fevered and listless, working quickly. He helped fashion a travois from wagon parts and distributed the family's belongings between it and his horse. There's a spring about 10 miles northeast. He told them, "We'll have to move at night, rest during the heat." It cost him 3 days to guide them to safety. 3 days of shared hardship that shifted something inside him. Watching Samuel hold his wife's hand, seeing their fierce protection of their children despite their own suffering, Caleb found himself thinking constantly of Clara. That one wild night played in his mind like a treasured song. Not just the passion, though Lord knew that had been unlike anything he'd experienced, but the quiet moments after, the way she'd traced the scar on his jaw with gentle fingers. How she'd laughed, soft and surprised, when he'd told her about the time he'd tried to ride an unbroken Mustang and ended up in a water trough. "Your mind's elsewhere, friend," Samuel observed on their last night together, after they'd reached the spring in safety. Caleb stirred the fire, sending sparks dancing into the star-filled sky. "Left something behind I shouldn't have. The heart wants what it wants." Samuel's wife, Mary, said softly, "We left everything to come west, chasing Samuel's dream of land. Sometimes I wonder if we were fools." "No," Samuel said firmly, pulling her close. "Home isn't a place. It's where your people are." The simple truth of it hit Caleb like a physical blow. All his life he'd been running from his father's farm in Missouri, from the war that had taken his brothers, from every woman who'd tried to gentle him. But Clara hadn't tried to change him. She'd simply seen him, accepted him, met him as an equal in that kitchen lit by dying embers. After parting with the Morrison family at the next settlement, Caleb sat in a dusty cantina, nursing a whiskey and wrestling with indecision. The job in Sonora waited. Good money, steady work. The trail ahead was clear, known, safe. But increasingly, his thoughts turned north. He found himself sketching maps in the dust, calculating distances, remembering the exact shade of Clara's eyes in the moonlight. The other patrons probably thought him drunk or mad, muttering to himself and shaking his head. "You heading to Sonora, amigo?" the bartender asked, refilling his glass. "Was," Caleb admitted. "Was. Man makes plans, but sometimes—" He trailed off, thinking of gray-green eyes and flour-dusted hands, of promises made in the pre-dawn darkness. That night, he dreamed of the Double Bar Ranch, but it wasn't memory. In the dream, Clara stood in the doorway with rounded belly, shading her eyes against the sun, waiting. The image was so vivid he woke with her name on his lips. An old Apache man sat by the waterhole where Caleb stopped the next day. His face was mapped with years of sun and struggle, but his eyes were sharp as obsidian. They shared the shade in companionable silence until the old man spoke. "You are troubled, white man." It wasn't a question. Caleb found himself telling the stranger about Clara, about the job waiting south, about the pull he felt northward. The Apache listened without judgment, occasionally nodding. "The desert tests all who cross it," he said finally. "It strips away what is false, leaves only truth. Your heart knows the way. The question is whether you have courage to follow." "It's not that simple. She has a life there, work." "The heart of the desert knows the way home," the old man interrupted, "even when the mind has forgotten." He rose and walked away, leaving Caleb alone with his thoughts. As the sun set, painting the rocks in shades of blood and gold, Caleb made his decision. He'd been drifting his whole life, taking the easy path, the known trail. But Clara had awakened something in him, not just desire, but a longing for connection, for belonging, for home. He turned dusty north that night, riding by the light of a crescent moon. The desert that had seemed endless going south now felt like an obstacle to overcome. He pushed harder than was wise, covering ground with single-minded determination. But the desert demanded its due. A sandstorm rose on the third day, a wall of brown fury that blotted out the sun. Caleb wrapped his face, hobbled dusty in the lee of a rock formation, and waited it out. The wind howled like a living thing, scouring exposed skin, filling every crevice with grit. When it finally passed, the landscape had changed. Familiar landmarks were obscured or gone entirely. His water was running low, and Dusty was showing signs of distress. Still, he pressed on, navigating by instinct and stars. Fever found him on the 5th day. Whether from bad water or infected cuts from the storm, he couldn't say. The world took on a dreamlike quality. Clara's voice calling through the wind, his dead brothers riding alongside him, the Apache elder appearing on distant ridges. He nearly missed the hidden spring. Would have ridden past if Dusty hadn't scented water and refused to continue. Caleb half fell from the saddle, crawling to the small pool among the rocks. The water was cool and sweet, bringing him back to himself slowly, as he rested in the shade, letting Dusty graze on the sparse grass. Caleb examined his choices with brutal honesty. He could still turn back, make it to Sonora, take the safe path. No one would know of his weakness, his failure to keep riding south. But he would know, and the knowledge would poison every day after, turning safety into a prison of his own making. "I'm coming back, Clara," he said to the empty desert. "God help me, I'm coming back." The words, once spoken, seemed to lighten his burden. He refilled his canteens, tended his horse, and prepared for the final push north. Somewhere beyond the shimmering horizon, past the sand and stone and burning sun, Clara waited, and whether she welcomed him or turned him away, at least he would have honored the promise made in those pre-dawn moments. The desert had tested him and found him wanting, not in courage to face its dangers, but in wisdom to recognize what truly mattered. Now, with each mile north, he was riding towards something instead of away. For a man who'd spent his life drifting, it was a revelation as vast as the Mojave itself. The winter winds howled through the canyon passes, bringing an early taste of the bitter cold to come. Clara pulled her shawl tighter as she crossed the yard to the smokehouse, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Her condition was becoming harder to hide, the fullness in her face, the way she moved with increasing care, the moments when she had to grip the table as the baby moved within her. "Mr." Daniels had called her to his office that morning, his weathered face grave beneath his silver hair. "Clara, we need to speak plainly. There's talk among the men, and Mrs. Daniels has concerns." Clara had stood straight, meeting his gaze directly. "Have I failed in my duties, sir?" "No, your work remains excellent, but the ranch has a reputation to maintain. A woman in your situation, it presents difficulties." "I see." Her voice was steady, despite the fear clawing at her chest. "When would you like me to leave?" "You can stay through the winter. After that." He'd shrugged, uncomfortable with the necessity. "I'll write you a reference. You've been a good worker." Now, feeding the smokehouse fire, Clara fought back tears. Where would she go? Her savings might get her to Denver, but finding work there in her condition would be near impossible. The letter from Catherine remained unanswered. How could she return home carrying an illegitimate child? That evening brought new troubles. The stranger who appeared at the kitchen door wasn't one of the regular hands. His face bore the marks of hard living scars, sun damage, and eyes that held no warmth. Clara recognized the type immediately. "Kitchen's closed," she said firmly, though her hand found the knife handle. "Now that ain't neighborly." He pushed inside without invitation, his presence filling the small space. "Name's Jake Colton. Maybe you heard of me?" Clara's blood ran cold. The Colton gang's reputation for violence preceded them. "What do you want?" "Supplies, food, whatever else might be available." His eyes traveled over her slowly, making her skin crawl. "Heard this ranch has a real accommodating cook. Take what you need and go." She gestured to the pantry, hoping compliance would speed his departure, but Colton wasn't interested in just supplies. He moved closer, backing her against the stove. "Lonely widow woman like you must get powerful lonesome. Maybe I could help with that." "No." Clara's hand closed on the heavy iron skillet. "Take the food and leave. Now. His face darkened. Playing hard to get? Or maybe you're only friendly with drifting cowboys who... The skillet caught him across the temple with a solid clang. He staggered, cursing, blood streaming down his face. Clara didn't wait to see if he'd fall. She ran for the door, screaming for help. Buck Lawson and 2 other hands responded, finding Colton dazed but conscious, reaching for his gun. The ensuing fight was brief but vicious. When it ended, Colton was tied in the barn, awaiting the sheriff, and Clara was shaking uncontrollably in Margaret Daniels' arms. "You did well," the older woman soothed. "You protected yourself." But Clara could see the calculation in her eyes. A pregnant widow who attracted dangerous men. The ranch couldn't afford such liability. That night, alone in her room, Clara finally broke. The tears came in great, gasping sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for Tom, for Caleb, for the child growing inside her, for the life she'd imagined that seemed to slip further away each day. The candle had burned low when she heard it, hoofbeats approaching fast. Her first thought was that more of Colton's gang had come for revenge. She grabbed Tom's pistol, checking the load with shaking hands. But the rider who burst into the yard wasn't an outlaw. Even in the moonlight, she recognized the tall figure, the way he sat his horse like he was born to it. "Caleb?" She whispered his name like a prayer, not daring to believe. He was off his horse and running toward her before she could move. Then his arms were around her, solid and real, smelling of desert dust and sage. "Clara, God, Clara, I'm sorry. I should never have left. She silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her fear and loneliness and joy into that connection. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "They said you were dead," she managed. "Shot in Mexico?" "Nearly was, but not in Mexico. Long story." His hands framed her face, thumbs wiping away her tears. "I turned back 3 days into the desert. Couldn't stop thinking about you, about that night. I've been trying to get back ever since, but there was trouble. Sandstorms, fever. Had to help some folks." "Caleb." She caught his hands, pressing them to her still small belly. "There's something you need to know." His eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Clara, are you—" "Yes." The word came out as barely a whisper. From that night. She expected shock, perhaps anger or denial. Instead, his face transformed with something like wonder. He dropped to his knees in the dusty yard, pressing his forehead to her stomach. "Mine," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Ours. Caleb, get up. People will see. Let them." He rose but kept his arms around her. "I'm done caring what people think. Clara, I came back to ask, to see if maybe—" He took a breath. "Marry me." The world seemed to stop. "Caleb, you don't have to. I'm not asking because I have to. I'm asking because I can't imagine riding away again, because every mile I traveled, I was thinking of you, because home isn't a place, it's a person, and you're mine." Clara wanted to say yes, wanted it more than her next breath. But reality intruded. "Mr. Daniels is letting me go after winter. My reputation here is ruined, and there's your work in Sonora. Forget Sonora. Forget all of it." His hands tightened on hers. "We'll go somewhere new. California, Oregon, anywhere you want. Start fresh. With what money? I have barely enough saved for stage fare. I have some put by. Not much, but enough to start." He pulled her close again. "Clara, I've been drifting my whole life. You're the first thing that ever made me want to stop. Please, take a chance on us." Before she could answer, shouts erupted from the barn. Colton had somehow gotten loose and was fighting with the guards. In the chaos that followed, gunshots, running men, orders shouted in the darkness. Clara lost sight of Caleb. When the dust settled, Colton lay dead in the yard, and Buck Lawson was nursing a bullet graze. Sheriff Watson had arrived, taking statements, trying to piece together the night's events. The widow was defending herself, Buck admitted grudgingly. Colton forced his way in, threatened her. She brained him good with a skillet. Through it all, Caleb stayed close, his presence a shield against the questions and stares. When the sheriff finally left near dawn, "Mr. Daniels approached them. "Morgan, isn't it? Heard you were headed to Mexico." Plans changed. Caleb's arm tightened around Clara's shoulders. "I'm asking Clara to be my wife." Daniels's eyebrows rose. "That's so. Well, Clara's been a fine worker. Hate to lose her, but..." He studied them both. "Are you planning to stay in these parts?" "No, sir. Thinking of heading to California. Start fresh." Daniels rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "My brother runs a spread near Sacramento. Always looking for good help. I could write you a letter." Clara felt tears threaten again, but these were different. Tears of hope rather than despair. "Mr. Daniels, that's very kind." "Nonsense. You've earned it." He nodded to Caleb. "You treat her right, Morgan. She deserves better than she's gotten from life." As the sun rose over the canyon walls, painting the world in shades of gold and possibility, Clara finally gave her answer. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." Caleb's whoop of joy probably woke everyone in 3 counties. But Clara didn't care. For the first time in 2 years, the future held promise instead of just survival. There would be challenges ahead. The journey to California, starting over with nothing, raising a child in a new land. But she wouldn't face them alone. The desert had tested them both and brought them full circle. Now, standing in each other's arms as the ranch awakened around them, they were ready to build something new from the ashes of their old lives, something strong enough to weather any storm. The trail north stretched before Caleb like a serpent of dust and danger, winding through canyon country where shadows could hide a dozen threats. He'd been riding hard for 2 days since leaving Clara, pushing Dusty to the limits of endurance. The promise he'd made echoed in his mind, to return quickly, to make arrangements for their new life, to prove he was a man of his word. But the West had other plans. The ambush came at Devil's Crossing, where the trail narrowed between towering red rocks. Caleb heard the whistle of the bullet before he felt it tear through his shoulder, spinning him half out of the saddle. Dusty reared as more shots rang out, the canyon walls throwing back echoes like thunder. 3 men emerged from the rock's remnants of the Colton gang, seeking vengeance for their leader's death. Caleb managed to slide from his horse and find cover behind a boulder, his left arm already going numb from the wound. "That's far enough, Morgan," a gravelly voice called. "Heard you was sweet on that widow woman. Shame you won't live to see her again." Caleb pressed his back against the rock, checking his ammunition with his good hand. 6 shots in the Colt, maybe a dozen more in his rifle if he could reach it on Dusty's saddle. Not enough for a prolonged fight. The outlaws had chosen their spot well. They held the high ground, with clear sight lines to any escape route. Blood soaked through his shirt, each heartbeat sending fresh waves of pain through his shoulder. He needed to act fast before weakness took him. "You boys got no quarrel with me," he called back. "Buying time. Jake Colton brought his fate on himself. He was our kin." Another voice, younger, full of rage. "That woman of yours killed him, and you're gonna pay for it." A bullet chipped stone inches from Caleb's head. He returned fire, forcing them back, but knew his position was untenable. The sun beat down mercilessly, and thirst was already making itself known. Without water, without medical attention, he'd be dead by nightfall. That's when he saw it, a narrow chimney in the rock face, barely wide enough for a man. It would leave him exposed for crucial seconds, but staying meant certain death. Clara's face flashed in his mind, giving him the strength to move. He emptied his pistol in a covering barrage and lunged for the opening. Bullets whined past as he squeezed into the chimney, climbing with desperate strength. The rough stone tore at his wound, each movement agony, but he pressed on. At the top, he found a defensible position with a clear view of the outlaws below. They'd lost their advantage and knew it. What followed was a deadly game of patience, each side waiting for the other to make a mistake. Hours passed. The sun tracked across the sky, and Caleb's throat grew parched. His shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, loss of blood making him dizzy. But he held on, thinking of Clara, of the child they'd created, of the future waiting if he could just survive this day. Near sunset, one of the outlaws grew careless, exposing himself for a clear shot at what he thought was Caleb's position. Caleb's rifle spoke once, and the man tumbled from the rocks. The odds had shifted. The remaining two tried to flank him as darkness fell. But Caleb had learned patience in 100 similar situations. He waited until they were committed, then struck. The gun battle was brief and vicious, muzzle flashes lighting the canyon like deadly fireflies. When silence finally returned, Caleb was the only one left standing. He half climbed, half fell back to where Dusty waited, the loyal horse having stayed despite the gunfire. With shaking hands, he bound his wound as best he could and pointed north once more. The next days blurred together in a haze of pain and determination. He followed water sources, resting when his body demanded it, pressing on when consciousness returned. Fever came and went in waves, bringing visions of Clara calling to him, of his dead brothers riding alongside, of the Apache elder pointing the way. It was at a remote Apache camp that salvation came. The people there had no love for white men, but they recognized courage when they saw it. An old woman, her face mapped with years of wisdom, tended his wound with herbs and poultices that burned like fire but fought off infection. "You have the look of a man riding toward something, not away," she observed in broken English. "My woman," Caleb managed through cracked lips. "My child." She nodded knowingly. "The desert tests those who would be worthy. You are being forged like iron in flame." For 3 days he rested among them, gaining strength from their simple food and bitter medicines. The warrior who'd led him to the camp watched with interest as Caleb checked his weapons, preparing to leave. "The men who shot you had bounties," the warrior said. "There is a trading post 2 days north. They will pay for proof." Caleb hadn't thought of that, but the money could help start their new life. He thanked the Apache with genuine gratitude, knowing they'd saved him when they had every reason to let him die. The trading post at Willow Springs was a rough collection of buildings where all manner of frontier business was conducted. The trader, a grizzled man named Josiah Burke, examined the items Caleb presented, personal effects that proved the outlaws' identities. "Well, I'll be damned. The Colton gang's been terrorizing these parts for months." He consulted a stack of wanted posters. "Says here there's $300 total for these boys." $300. Not a fortune, but enough to buy supplies, maybe a small wagon for the journey to California. Caleb signed the necessary papers with a hand that still trembled from his ordeal. "You look like hell, friend," Burke observed. "There's a dock in town if you need. I need to get back south. My woman's waiting." Burke studied him with knowing eyes. "The widow Whitman at the Double Bar." Caleb's hand moved instinctively to his gun. "You know her?" "Easy. Friend. Just heard talk is all. Word is she's leaving soon. Heading west. You the reason?" "I am." "Then you'd best hurry. Stage comes through the Double Bar next week. Might be she's planning to take it." The words sent ice through Caleb's veins. What if Clara thought he'd abandoned her again? What if she'd decided to leave on her own? He was back in the saddle within the hour, wounded shoulder protesting every movement. The race south became a blur of hard riding and harder nights. He changed horses at way stations, spending precious dollars to maintain his pace. His wound reopened twice, requiring hasty field dressing. But he couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. Dreams plagued his fitful rest. Clara boarding a stage, disappearing into the distance. The child he'd never meet. The life that might have been if he'd been faster, stronger, better. It was near dawn of the 5th day when familiar landmarks appeared. The Double Bar's canyon walls rose before him like a promise of home. He'd made it, though at what cost to his body he couldn't yet calculate. But as he crested the final ridge, his heart nearly stopped. There in the yard sat a loaded wagon, Clara's few possessions visible among the supplies. She stood beside it in her traveling clothes, speaking with Mr. Daniels. "Clara!" The shout tore from his throat as he spurred Dusty down the slope. She turned at the sound, and even at a distance. He could see her face transform. Then she was running toward him, skirts forgotten, dignity abandoned. Nothing existing but the space between them that decreased with each heartbeat. He barely managed to dismount before she reached him, her arms going around him with desperate strength. "Caleb, oh God, I thought—" "When you didn't come back, I thought—" "I'm here," he said into her hair, breathing in the scent of her, feeling the solid reality of her body against his. "I'm here, and I'm never leaving again." She pulled back, finally seeing his condition, the blood-stained shirt, the pallor of his skin, the way he swayed on his feet. "You're hurt. Long story. But I'm alive, and I kept my promise." He pulled the money from his pocket with a shaking hand. "Got us a stake for California. We can leave today if you're ready." Tears streamed down her face as she helped him to the kitchen, her usual place of refuge, as she tended his wound with gentle hands. He told her everything: the ambush, the Apache, the bounty money that would help them start fresh. "I was going to take the stage," she admitted. "Mr. Daniels was going to drive me to meet it. I thought you changed your mind." "Never." He caught her hand, pressing it to his lips. "It just took longer to find my way back than planned. The desert had one more test for me. No more tests," she said firmly. "No more separations. From now on, we face everything together." As the sun rose over the canyon walls, painting their future in shades of gold and possibility, Caleb knew she was right. He'd crossed the desert not once but twice for this woman, faced death and survived. Now, with Clara beside him and their child growing between them, he was finally ready to stop running and start living. The wagon was loaded, the team ready. California waited with its promises of new beginnings. But for now, in this moment, they had everything they needed, each other, hard-won and tested by fire, ready to face whatever the trail ahead might bring. The night came alive with violence as riders thundered into the ranch yard, their torches casting dancing shadows against the barn walls. Clara had been cleaning the kitchen when she heard the first shots, the sound freezing her blood. Through the window, she could see masked men, what remained of the Colton gang, come for their final revenge. "Everyone to the main house!" Buck Lawson's voice rang out as he fired from the bunkhouse doorway. But the outlaws had planned well, hitting fast and hard when most of the hands were still out with the herd. Clara grabbed Tom's old rifle from its place by the door, checking the load with hands that had grown steady through months of frontier hardship. The baby moved within her, as if sensing the danger. She pressed a protective hand to her belly, then moved to a defensive position by the window. The kitchen door exploded inward. A masked figure stood silhouetted against the flames, now licking at the hay barn. Clara didn't hesitate. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and the man stumbled backward with a cry. "That's for Jake," someone shouted. "Burn it all! Find the woman!" Clara knew she couldn't hold the kitchen alone. She grabbed her medical supplies and the small cash box hidden beneath the floorboards, then slipped out the back door into the chaos of the night. The scene that greeted her was something from a nightmare. The barn was fully ablaze, horses screaming as brave hands tried to free them. Gunfire crackled from multiple positions. Mr. Daniels was down near the corral. Margaret crouched beside him, pressing cloth to a wound in his side. Clara ran to them, dodging between buildings as bullets whined past. Her medical training, learned from years of patching up injured cowboys, took over. The wound was serious, but not immediately fatal if she could stop the bleeding. "The main house," Margaret gasped. "We need to get him inside." Together, they half-dragged, half-carried the ranch owner toward safety. Buck and two other hands were making a stand from the house, their rifles keeping the outlaws at bay. But ammunition wouldn't last forever, and the fire was spreading. Inside, Clara worked by lamplight, her world narrowing to the task of keeping Mr. Daniels alive. She could hear Buck organizing the defense, his gravelly voice steady despite the chaos. "How many are there?" someone asked. 6, maybe 7. They're trying to burn us out." Clara finished binding the wound and looked up to find Buck watching her with something like respect. You did good, ma'am, real good." Before she could respond, glass shattered as a torch came through the window. Flames caught the curtains immediately. They were running out of time and options. That's when she heard it, a sound that cut through the gunfire like a knife through cloth. A war cry she'd heard once before, when Caleb had told her about his time with the Apache. Through the smoke and confusion, mounted warriors appeared like ghosts, striking the outlaws from behind. The tide turned in minutes. Caught between the defenders and the unexpected Apache intervention, the Colton gang scattered. Some fell to arrows and bullets. Others fled into the darkness. The warriors pursued briefly, then returned to help fight the fires. Clara found herself working alongside an Apache woman to form a bucket brigade from the well. Together, ranchers and Apache fought the flames that threatened to consume everything. By dawn, the barn was gone, but the main buildings stood. The Apache warrior, who seemed to be their leader, approached Clara as she tended the wounded. His face was painted for war, but his eyes held intelligence and purpose. "You are the woman of Caleb Morgan," he said in accented English. Clara's heart leaped. "You know Caleb? He helped my people. We pay debts." He gestured to his warriors. "The men who hurt him are no more. You are under our protection." Tears blurred Clara's vision. Even absent, Caleb was still protecting her through the bonds he'd formed. "Thank you," she managed. The warrior nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "He is a man of honor. The child will be strong." As the Apache melted back into the desert, the ranch began counting the cost. 2 hands dead, several wounded. The barn and much of the winter feed destroyed, but they'd survived. And the Colton gang was broken forever. Sheriff Watson arrived by midday with a posse. "Far too late to help?" He surveyed the damage with a grim expression. "Heard the Apache were involved." "They helped us," Clara said firmly. "Without them, we'd all be dead." The sheriff's expression suggested what he thought of Apache help, but faced with the united testimony of the survivors, he had little choice but to accept it. In the aftermath, as the ranch pulled together to rebuild, Clara found her status had changed. She was no longer the suspect widow, but the woman who'd stood and fought, who'd saved the owner's life, who'd earned the protection of the Apache. Even Buck Lawson treated her with gruff kindness. Margaret Daniels pulled her aside as the sun set on that long day. "John and I have been talking. We want you to know you'll always have a place here. You and the baby both." Clara felt tears threaten. "That's kind, but Caleb and I will make your own way." "I know, but if you ever need anything, the Double Bar won't forget what you did today." That night, alone in her room with the smell of smoke still heavy in the air, Clara sat at her small table and wrote, "My dearest Caleb, tonight I fought for our future with guns and buckets, alongside Apache warriors who remembered your kindness. I killed a man to protect what we're building together. The frontier has made me harder than the girl you met that first night, but my love remains unchanged. I stood under the stars after the battle, and I swear I could feel you out there, fighting your own battles to return to us. Be safe, my love. Be swift. Your child and I are waiting, stronger than you left us and ready for whatever comes next." She sealed the letter, though she had no way to send it. It was enough to put the words to paper, to make her feelings real in this world of violence and uncertainty. The next days brought a flurry of activity. The ranch hands worked to clear the rubble and begin rebuilding. Clara threw herself into feeding the workers and tending the wounded, her pregnancy now obvious to all but no longer a source of shame. She'd earned her place through fire and blood. News trickled in from the outside world. The surviving Colton gang members had been caught trying to cross into Mexico. The Apache had returned to their hidden camps, but their message was clear. Clara Whitman Morgan was under their protection. As she worked, Clara often found herself touching Caleb's neckerchief, still carried in her pocket. Each sunset, she stood watching the southern horizon, willing him to appear. The baby was active now, responding to her moods, settling when she sang the old lullabies her mother had taught her. One evening, as she served supper to the tired workers, old Pete, the stable hand approached hesitantly. "Miss Clara, that horse of yours is getting mighty restless. Might be she senses something coming." Clara's heart skipped. The mare Caleb had left for her had been calm for weeks. Animals often knew things people couldn't sense. She hurried to the corral, where indeed the mare was pacing, ears pricked toward the south. "What is it, girl?" Clara murmured, stroking the velvet nose. "What do you know?" The mare whinnied softly, and Clara found herself gripping the rail with white knuckles. Somewhere out there, Caleb was coming home. She could feel it in her bones, in the quickening of her child, in the very air around her. "Tomorrow," she whispered to the rising moon. "Let it be tomorrow." The ranch settled into sleep, but Clara remained at her window, watching. She'd learned patience in these long months, learned strength she never knew she possessed. The girl who'd served meals in silence was gone, replaced by a woman who'd faced down outlaws and emerged victorious. When Caleb returned, and she refused to believe in any other outcome, he'd find not the frightened widow he'd left, but a partner tested by fire. Together, they'd build something new from the ashes of their old lives. The frontier demanded nothing less than transformation, and Clara had paid that price willingly. The stars wheeled overhead, silent witnesses to her vigil. In the distance, a wolf howled, and its mate answered. Even the wild creatures knew the value of connection in this harsh land. Clara touched her belly where new life grew, promise made flesh, and kept watch for the man who'd crossed deserts to claim their forever. Dawn broke gray and cold over the Double Bar Ranch, frost glittering on the fence posts like scattered diamonds. Clara stood at the gravesite, placing wildflowers on the fresh mounds where yesterday they'd buried the men who'd died defending the ranch. The bitter wind cut through her shawl, but she barely noticed, lost in prayer for souls claimed by frontier violence. A sound made her turn. Hoofbeats, slow and steady, coming up the canyon road. Her heart leaped as it always did, but she'd learned not to trust hope too easily. Then the rider crested the hill, and even at a distance, she knew. Caleb sat slumped in his saddle, one arm bound tight to his chest, his clothes dusty and blood-stained, but he was alive, gloriously alive, and coming home. Clara ran, her condition forgotten, feet flying over the frozen ground. He managed to dismount just as she reached him, catching her in his good arm, holding her as if she might vanish like morning mist. Neither spoke at first. What words could encompass the fear, the longing, the relief of this moment? "Clara," he finally whispered against her hair. "My Clara." She pulled back to study his face, noting the new lines pain had carved there, the pallor beneath his tan. "You're hurt. How bad?" "I'll live, especially now." His hand moved to her rounded belly, wonder replacing exhaustion in his eyes. "The baby." "Strong, like its father." She supported him as they walked toward the kitchen, her sanctuary and domain. "There's so much to tell you." As she tended his wound, a through and through in the shoulder, healing but still angry, she told him about the attack, the Apache intervention, the change in how the ranch folk viewed her. Caleb listened in silence, his jaw tightening when she described shooting the outlaw. "I should have been here," he said when she finished. "You were, in a way, the Apache came because of you. Your kindness came back to protect us when we needed it most." She tied off the fresh bandage. "Besides, I'm not the same woman you left. The frontier changes everyone it touches." "Not where it matters," he said, catching her hand. "Not in here." He pressed her palm to his chest, where his heart beat strong and steady. A knock interrupted them. Buck Lawson stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "Morgan, heard you were back. Mr. Daniels wants to see you both when you're able." They found the ranch owner propped in bed, still pale from his wound, but alert. Margaret sat beside him, their hands clasped in the way of couples who'd weathered many storms together. "Caleb Morgan," Daniel said, "Clara's told us about your plans for California. Before you go, I have a proposition." Caleb tensed, but Clara squeezed his hand reassuringly. "I'm getting too old for this business." Daniels continued, Getting shot has a way of making a man think. Margaret and I have been talking about selling, moving to Denver where our daughter lives. The thing is, we'd rather not sell to strangers. Sir, Caleb's voice was carefully neutral. I'm offering you the chance to buy the double bar, not all at once. I know you don't have that kind of money, but over time, with fair terms, you've both proven yourselves. Clara in ways I never expected, and you by coming back when easier paths beckoned. Clara felt Caleb's surprise match her own. Mr. Daniels, we don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. California's got its charms, but this land has a way of claiming those who belong to it, and after what I've seen, I believe you both belong here. They left the meeting in stunned silence, walking slowly toward the corrals where horses dozed in the winter sun. The offer was more than they'd ever dreamed. A chance at land, legacy, belonging. What do you think? Clara asked finally. Caleb leaned against the fence, his good arm around her. Month ago, I'd have said no without thinking. I've been running so long, the idea of staying put seemed like death, but now... He looked down at her, and she saw her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. Maybe running isn't freedom. Maybe freedom is choosing to stand and fight for something worth keeping. The ranch holds hard memories for me, Clara admitted, but also where we began, where our child was conceived. There's poetry in making it truly ours. Poetry. Caleb chuckled, the sound rusty from disuse. Listen to you. Though I reckon you're right. Question is, can we work together every day without killing each other? I'm not exactly easy to live with. Neither am I. Ask anyone who's worked in my kitchen. She turned in his arms, facing him fully. But I'd rather fight with you than live peacefully with anyone else. He kissed her then, there in the bright winter morning with the ranch hands trying not to stare. It was different from their desperate first kiss. This held promise, commitment, the quiet confidence of two people who'd been tested and not found wanting. The next days passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Word spread quickly through the territory. Clara Whitman and Caleb Morgan were to be married, and the double bar would stay in capable hands. Even the taciturn ranch hands seemed pleased, having witnessed both Clara's courage and Caleb's return against all odds. The wedding was simple, held in the ranch's main room with the circuit preacher officiating. Clara wore her best dress, let out to accommodate her condition, with wild flowers in her hair. Caleb stood tall despite his healing wound, his eyes never leaving her face as they spoke their vows. Do you, Clara Whitman, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? I do. The words came strong and clear, erasing 2 years of widowhood and loneliness. Do you, Caleb Morgan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? I do. His voice held the weight of deserts crossed and battles won, of promises kept against all odds. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, the ranch hands erupted in cheers. Even Buck Lawson was seen wiping his eyes, though he'd deny it to his dying day. The celebration was modest but joyful. Margaret had overseen a feast, and someone produced a fiddle. As twilight painted the sky purple and gold, Caleb and Clara danced slowly in the courtyard, careful of both his wound and her condition. No more wild nights, she murmured against his chest. We're respectable married folk now. Speak for yourself, he replied, making her laugh. I plan on many wild nights with my wife, just maybe not the kind that involves gunfights and desert crossings. What kind, then? The kind where we build something together, where we raise our children to be strong and free, where we grow old watching sunsets from our own land. He spun her carefully. That wild enough for you, Mrs. Morgan? It'll do, Mr. Morgan. It'll do just fine. As the stars emerged one by one, the celebration continued around them. But Clara and Caleb existed in their own world, two souls who'd found each other across impossible odds. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Running a ranch, raising a child, building a life from hope and determination. But tonight, they had each other, and that was enough. The frontier had tested them with separation and violence, with doubt and despair. But they'd emerged stronger, forged into something unbreakable. The wild night that had brought them together was just the beginning. Now came the harder task, building a love that could last not just through passion's fire, but through all the ordinary days that make a life. Clara touched the neckerchief still in her pocket, then let it go. She didn't need tokens anymore. She had the man himself, scarred and stubborn, and hers, together. They'd write their story on this unforgiving land, one day at a time, one season at a time, until the desert itself would remember their names. The courthouse in Cedar Ridge stood like a monument to civilization's reach into the frontier, red brick and white columns rising from the dusty main street. Clara gripped Caleb's hand as they climbed the steps, both aware that the next hours would determine their future. Behind them, Sheriff Watson and his deputies escorted the captured outlaws, chains clanking with each step. Inside, the courtroom was packed. News of the trial had spread throughout the territory, the final members of the Colton gang facing justice, with testimony from the woman who'd fought them and the man who'd killed their kin in self-defense. Judge Harrison, a stern man with silver whiskers, called the proceedings to order. "We're here to determine the fate of these men accused of attempted murder, arson, and robbery at the Double Bar Ranch," he intoned. "Mrs. Morgan, please take the stand." Clara rose carefully, her pregnancy now impossible to hide. She felt the weight of every eye in the room as she placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor, a young man named Thomas Reed, guided her through the events of that terrible night. "They came with torches and guns," Clara testified, her voice steady despite the memories. "Their intent was clear: burn us out and kill anyone who resisted, if the Apache hadn't intervened." "Objection!" The defense attorney, imported from Denver, jumped to his feet. "Hearsay about alleged Apache involvement. I saw them myself," Clara said firmly. "Warriors who came to our aid because my husband had helped their people. Without them, everyone at the ranch would be dead." She continued her testimony, describing the attack in careful detail. When asked about shooting one of the attackers, she met the judge's eyes directly. "I defended my life and the lives of others. Any woman would have done the same." Caleb testified next, his wound still evident in how carefully he moved. He spoke of the ambush at Devil's Crossing, of fighting for his life against men bent on revenge. His words were sparse but powerful, painting a picture of outlaws who'd chosen violence and paid the price. The defense tried to paint them as vigilantes, as lovers whose passion had led to bloodshed. They brought up Clara's widowhood, Caleb's drifter past, trying to muddy the waters of clear self-defense. "Isn't it true, Mr. Morgan, that you seduced a grieving widow and brought violence to her doorstep?" The defense attorney pressed. Caleb's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. "I fell in love with a strong woman who'd already faced more than her share of hardship. The violence came from men who chose the outlaw trail. We just refused to be victims." Character witnesses followed. Mr. Daniels, still weak but determined, spoke of Clara's years of faithful service and her courage during the attack. Buck Lawson, uncomfortable in his Sunday clothes, grudgingly admitted that both Morgans had proven themselves. Even the Apache situation was addressed when an Indian agent testified that the tribe had confirmed providing assistance against mutual enemies. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. When they filed back in, Clara held her breath, knowing that despite the clear facts, frontier justice could be unpredictable. "We find the defendants guilty on all charges," the foreman announced. The relief was overwhelming. Judge Harrison sentenced the surviving gang members to long prison terms, then turned his attention to Clara and Caleb. "Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, this court recognizes that you acted in clear self-defense, Moreover, your actions helped break up a gang that had terrorized this territory for too long. You're free to go with the court's thanks." As they emerged into the afternoon sun, Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The past was finally settled. All debts paid, all threats ended. They could look forward now without constantly checking their backs. "It's over," she said wonderingly. "No," Caleb corrected gently. "It's just beginning." The ride back to the Double Bar took 2 days, camping under stars that seemed to shine with extra brilliance. They talked of plans, improvements to the ranch, breeding programs for the horses, perhaps adding sheep to diversify. Practical dreams, but dreams nonetheless. When they crested the final ridge, the ranch spread before them in the golden evening light. It looked different somehow, knowing it would be theirs. The new barn was nearly complete, ranch hands visible working on the roof. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney, Margaret keeping things running in Clara's absence. "Home," Caleb said simply. "Home," Clara agreed, the word tasting sweet on her tongue. The next morning brought a gathering in the main house. Mr. and Mrs. Daniels had prepared the papers, making the sale official. The terms were more than fair, a down payment from Caleb's bounty money, then yearly payments they could manage if they worked hard and had reasonable luck. "The Double Bar's been good to us," Mr. Daniels said as they signed. "Treat her well, and she'll do the same for you." Clara signed her name with a steady hand. Clara Morgan, rancher. The title felt strange, but right, like a coat that needed wearing to fit properly. That evening, she and Caleb walked their land as owners for the first time. They paused at the hill overlooking the valley, where a large oak provided shade, the same tree where they'd buried the casualties of the outlaw attack. "This is where I want to build our house," Clara said suddenly. "Where we can see everything, protect what's ours, but also remember what it cost." Caleb nodded slowly. "Good spot, defensible, but beautiful too. Room for children to play." "Children," Clara repeated, hand on her belly. "This one first, then others if we're blessed. A whole passel of them," Caleb agreed. "Strong daughters like their mother, stubborn sons like their father. Lord help us all." Clara laughed, as if in response. The baby kicked strongly. Caleb's eyes widened as he felt the movement under his palm. That's our child, saying hello to its father." Clara covered his hand with hers. "Welcome home, Caleb. Truly home." They stood together as the sun set, painting their valley in shades of rose and gold. The journey had been long and dangerous, from a wild night in a ranch kitchen to this moment of quiet triumph. Clara thought of all the moments that had led here, the loneliness after Tom's death, the spark of connection with a traveling stranger, the courage to reach for love despite the risk. Caleb pulled her close, and she knew his thoughts traveled similar paths. The desert crossing, the choice to turn back, the battles fought to return to her. Every scar was a marker on the map of their love, proof of what they'd endure for each other. "I used to think freedom meant having no ties," he said quietly, "never staying long enough for roots to grab hold, but I was wrong." "Oh." "Freedom is choosing your ties, choosing to stay, choosing to build something worth defending." He kissed her temple. "You taught me that." "We taught each other," Clara corrected. "That's what partners do." As darkness fell, they made their way back to the ranch house, not as cook and drifter, not even as newlyweds playing at permanence, but as partners who'd been tested by fire and emerged stronger. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The baby would come soon, bringing joy and sleepless nights in equal measure. The ranch would demand everything they had to give and more. But tonight, in the kitchen where it all began, Clara served a simple meal to her husband. They ate by candlelight, hands touching across the scarred wooden table. No words needed. Outside, coyotes called to their mates across the darkness, and the wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. Later, in their bed, Caleb traced gentle fingers over Clara's skin, marveling at the life they'd created. "Do you ever regret that night?" he asked. how it changed everything. Never, Clara said firmly. That wild night gave me you, gave us this child, gave us a future. I'd live it again 1,000 times. Even the hard parts, the fear, the violence, the uncertainty, especially those, they proved what we could survive together. She turned to face him fully. The ranch cook gave you one wild night, Caleb Morgan, but you gave me something better. You crossed the desert to taste forever. And forever is what we have now. He kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and promise into the connection. Outside, the ranch settled into sleep, secure in the knowledge that strong hands and true hearts would guide it forward. The double bar had new owners, but more than that, it had a family. As Clara drifted towards sleep, safe in Caleb's arms, she thought she heard the desert wind whispering its approval. They'd passed its tests, earned their place, proved their love was stronger than sand and sun and distance. The frontier had tried to break them and failed. Now it would watch them build something lasting from the ashes of their former lives. The wild night was long past, but its legacy lived on, in the child growing beneath Clara's heart, in the land now bearing their names, in the love that had survived every trial. They'd tasted forever in each other's arms, and forever stretched before them now, bright with promise as a desert dawn. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and let me know your thoughts about Clara and Caleb's journey. Your support means everything.